to introduce Sascha DuBrul. He is co-founder of the Icarus Project, a network of peer-based mental health support groups and media projects dedicated to redefining the language and culture of mental health and illness. He has a master's from Silberman School of Social Work and worked from 2016 to 2019 as a recovery specialist and trainer at Columbia's Center for Practice Innovations at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He's currently a trainer at the Institute for the Development of Human Arts. He's the co-author of Navigating the Space Between Brilliance and Madness, Friends Make the Best Medicine, a guide to creating community mental health support networks, and is the author of Maps to the Other Side, The Adventures of a Bipolar Cartographer. Sasha maintains a public and private practice and resides in Los Angeles with his partner Alice and their 3-year-old twins, Lila and Silas. So I will hand it over to Sasha and let him take it from here. We are so glad to have each and every one of you join us today, and I think you'll find this to be a pretty amazing webinar. So Sasha, take it away, please.
Leon, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here, and I really, I just want to say the next 3 hours, I'm really looking forward to presenting all this material to you all and getting, getting feedback. And I have to say, like, most of the stuff that I'm going to be training you on today is stuff I haven't really trained before. I mean, I've been doing some internal family system stuff, but I'm really upping the game here, and I'm hoping that you learn a lot from it. I will say that this practice, the internal family systems, as a life practice, has really transformed my life as someone who, was diagnosed with psychotic disorder when I was a teenager, and has had a long life of navigating my own mental health issues. So let's just get right into it, and I'm gonna share my screen, and it's probably not gonna be that easy for me to see the questions that you all have, but we're gonna be doing a mix of breakout rooms, and be prepared to do a breakout room after. I'm gonna break you up into a group of 3 or 4. After I've shown you some slides. I also just want to say, like, so, how do I say it? I really think that the stuff that I'm teaching y'all, it's about working with other people, it's about working with yourself, but it's also about transforming the way that we think about the world. And yeah, I hope you feel it as I'm going through it. Okay, so let's just get started. So what is internal family systems? Internal family systems is a therapeutic approach that views the mind as composed of different parts, each with its own perspective, emotions, and roles. In the context of psychosis, IFS helps individuals understand and integrate these parts, fostering self-leadership and reducing internal conflict, which can depolarize extreme mental states. Now, there's some language in this first slide that, if you're not familiar with IFS, you'll be like, what are you talking about? Depolarizing extreme mental states. But by the time you get done with this workshop, you're going to know what I'm talking about. And that, what I just said, also applies to this slide here. So really, if you want to understand internal family systems, the way that I've come to think about it is that it's a way of thinking about the human mind and the way we think, but it's like it's a constraint release model. And what does that mean, a constraint release model? What it means is that everything that we need, we already have, and that it's just a question of letting go of the things that might be in our way. And so this language of managers, firefighters, exiles, if this is new language to you, I promise you in a little while that it won't be, and hopefully you'll find it useful. I I like to put this slide up with the golden thread image, because there's this ancient Greek myth, where Theseus ends up having to go into a labyrinth and slay a minotaur and come out, and the way he does it is he leaves himself a trail of golden thread, and that's often how I think about the work that I do with myself and with other people, is that we're like, we're leaving ourselves trails. How you feel about something one day or from one moment to the next might not be how you see things otherwise. And a labyrinth, is a place where we can get stuck, but it's also a place that we can get to know. So, without you even knowing it, we just did a centering practice. Okay, so these are agreements for us. Now, we're not all in the same place, but we're going to be doing a little bit of stuff where we're interacting with each other in groups and in pairs. And so I'm going to say, in this case, I'm asking you that we honor everyone, that everyone has an internal system with parts, some of which carry past wounds or serve protective roles, and that we lead with self, that we stay connected to our calm, compassionate center with curiosity and care. We respect protective parts. If you feel discomfort or the need to withdraw, listen to those parts and give them some space. And we pause as needed. We take breaks if overwhelmed, prioritizing your well-being. So if like at some point, if you're like, man, I'm sick of hearing this guy talking, just like feel free to step away, go step outside, go do something away from the screen. There'll be a recording of this. You can watch it. You can watch it as much as you want afterwards. Listen with compassion. When you're listening to someone else speak about what's going on for them, approach their experience with curiosity, recognizing that we all have our own inner systems, and maintain confidentiality. Respect the story shared here and help keep the space safe and supportive. So what I want to say about this slide is that, once again, there's a bunch of language that I put it here on purpose, because it might not make total sense if you're new to IFS, but it will by the end. Okay, so getting this all out of the way at the beginning, this is what we're going to be doing together. So basically, we're in the introduction now. We're going to have I'm going to give a brief presentation about psychosis and what from my perspective is psychosis in the context of psychosis and IFS. Then we're going to be talking about systemic family therapy for psychosis, and I'm particularly excited about this part because I feel like this is I'm going to teach you a little bit of history about some things that were happening in the mental health system that kind of got crushed in the 1980s with the rise of biopsychiatry. And then we're gonna do an introduction to the internal family systems model, which is really the heart of this presentation, and talk about how IFS understands psychosis. And so in between these, we're going to do a group exercise, and then we're going to be doing an exercise getting to know a protector and speaking for parts. And I think I think y'all will appreciate it and enjoy it. Okay, and then we're going to talk about managers, firefighters, and exiles. And basically, because I want you to come away from this presentation with a solid introductory grounding into the IFS model, so that you can reflect on it and potentially use it in your life and engage with other people out in the world who are using it. And we'll do a exercise about polarization, which there's a lot of polarization going on in the world right now, and there's also, like, if we want to understand the nature of psychosis, I think it's important to understand polarization. And then we'll have a little conclusion, and then we'll take breaks as we need to as we go. Okay, so here we go. So your teacher doesn't get enough sleep, but he's happy. I have to share a picture of my kids, because really, they actually just turned 3 years old. And one of the things about having kids is that, it teaches you a lot about parts work. It teaches you a lot, because basically I went from being like a solo person to being like, I'm connected to a family system. And and anyway, I'll probably be talking about my kids a little bit. So a couple of things about me. So I'm someone who spent a bunch of time locked up in psychiatric hospitals when I was young, from like the ages of 18 to 33. I'm gonna be 50 in a couple months. So whatever, like that like in the middle of that, when I was in my 20s, I started this organization with my friend Jax called the Icarus Project, which was like a network of peer-based mental health support groups. And the Icarus Project continues to have reverberations out in the world. And I'll be discussing it briefly. I've been around a long time writing stories and organizing with other mad folks like me. And then I spent some years working in the public mental health system, which I'll talk about. And I've been an IFS practitioner since 2019, and that's when I started a private practice. And those are things. Now you know. If you didn't know that stuff, now you know that stuff. And move on. Okay. In this training, you will explore the core concepts of IFS and how they apply to working with psychosis. Learn practical tools for navigating complex internal dynamics and fostering self-awareness in clients with serious mental illness. Understand how IFS provides a non-pathologizing framework for recovery and resilience, and gain skills to integrate IFS into your practice to support clients' internal harmony. Now, I'm just going to say right here that one of the things they teach you when you're studying IFS is that people who are not therapists actually learn it quicker than people who are therapists, because there's a whole lot of learning about assessment and diagnosis that if you're not a therapist, you don't have to like unlearn that stuff. But so anyway, for the sake of this training, whether you work with others in a professional way, or whether you are just a person trying to do whatever you're doing, this workshop is for you. Okay. What is psychosis? So before I get into these slides, I would like it if you would just get a thought in your mind of, when you think of psychosis, what do you think of? When you think, what's your understanding of psychosis? Just like reflect on it for a moment as I sit here and reflect on it myself. What is psychosis? It's like I think it could almost be like a koan. But we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to give you some concrete perspective. Okay. Well, the concrete medical disclaimer is that before using the IFS model to work with psychosis, it's essential to rule out any underlying medical conditions, as various health issues can cause psychotic-like symptoms. That said, I believe that most individuals diagnosed with psychotic disorders are not suffering from a biological disease like Huntington's disease, or like a traumatic brain injury, or like there are a number of things that it's actually really helpful to have a psychiatrist around to be able to assess and diagnose if someone is struggling. But once you do that, then I think we're safe to talk about all this stuff. Okay. Psychosis from both sides of the academy. Okay, so I have a mentor friend named Brad Lewis, who's a psychiatrist. He became a psychiatrist in the 80s, and he ended up like becoming a psychiatrist and then being like, whoa, what am I doing? And then he went back to school and studied philosophy. And he's the guy who taught me that it's really important to think about the way we think of the mental health system as right now it really exists. It tries to exist in the hard sciences, like the DSM, biological psychiatry, thinks of itself as a hard science, but that for most of human history, what we consider psychosis or what we consider psychiatry was really in the realm of philosophy and art and music and like anything that that you can now film, like any like there's there's a lot to learn about the human condition from literature, and and I think it's really interesting that in the modern day there's like the split, so that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about what is psychosis. All right, briefly, the DSM overview of psychotic symptoms are, like you were diagnosed as, you know, having a psychotic disorder if you have delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, disorganized or abnormal behavior, or negative symptoms. And for me, oh yeah, okay. So here it gets personal for a minute. So I'll tell you something about myself, which is that I went to social work school after years of running the Icarus Project, and then I got this amazing job working at a place called On Track New York, working under the Center for Practice Innovations, where I got to develop the peer specialist role for these first episode psychosis programs. So I spent like 3 years, like really like in the heart of the beast, really, like with what you see on this that building in the background is the New York State Psychiatric Institute where I worked, and it's considered the most powerful psychiatric institute in the world. It's like where, you know, much of the research for schizophrenia, biological research for schizophrenia happens. Um and I learned a lot of things about a lot of things doing that work. I mean, I think that um I got a real understanding of how much just how many young people are suffering from what you know get called psychotic disorders, and that really what we're doing in the mainstream medical model, while there's some you know progressive aspects to first episode programs, like they have a lot of them have, you know, peer specialists working on them, they're still primarily you know based on making sure people are taking medication. And we don't have like we're not going to delve into the complexity of the medication conversation today, but part of what I want to get across to you all is that I think that programs like this, like the one that I used to work at, and like programs in general that are like working to help people, young people diagnosed with psychotic disorders, or people who are struggling in the mental health system, that there's actually there's a lot that's we already know about working with folks that just isn't used, that kind of fell out of fashion. And I think that internal family systems has a potential to bring it back. Okay, so on this conversation of psychosis still, while unsettling, what gets called psychosis often carries important messages or insights from parts of ourselves that have been pushed aside or ignored. And this slide, you can see this is the old Icarus Project website, which basically, you know, for years of my life, for way over a decade, I was a part of building this community that became like kind of a magnet for really interesting people, a lot of whom were diagnosed with psychotic disorders, people who were like, you know, struggling, had intense mental health struggles, but also were trying to figure out a way to make sense of those struggles outside the mainstream medical narrative. And so anyway, this question of what is psychosis, we could like talk about it for hours, but I just wanted to make sure at the beginning to give enough of a framework so we could be on the same page about it. Okay, so let's talk about systemic family therapy. What you'll see on the slide is that that's a family therapy textbook, and if you look at the authors' names on it, the co-author of the book is a guy named Richard Schwartz, who happens to be the founder of internal family systems thinking. And I was in Berkeley, California one day at Half Price Books, and I found a copy of this family therapy book. And a lot of what I'm about to say to you is stuff that comes directly out of that book. I think that the thing that was so striking to me when I read this stuff, when I learned about the history of systemic family therapy, was that there was like these really brilliant ideas that ended up being really like, you know, we like kind of just like cast aside doesn't even really do it. It's more like crushed. So what I'm hoping is that, you know, inevitably, you know, maybe you know something about this topic, and I hope that you learn some more as you're looking at this. But yeah, anyway, I'm hoping that you learn stuff, and looking at this, because in some ways I see it as kind of like a time capsule. Like in some ways we can go back to the past and be like, what were they doing back there then before the rise of the biopsychiatric model and neoliberalism, like that decimated the way that we think about humans? And maybe we can make some changes in the future. Okay, so here we go. A brief but rich history of systemic family therapy. So, systems thinking recognizes the importance of focusing on the pattern of relationships within a system rather than the substance of its parts. So you can look at an individual, you can have a family, you can have one person in a family who's sick, who has a diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, and say, whoa, that person has a biological brain disease. Let's put them on let's give them a monthly injection to make sure that they don't get out of control and upset everyone. Or you could look at the family system and say, huh, is there things happening in this family system that are exacerbating what this person is going through? And furthermore, are there ways that what this person is doing in their psychotic process that's actually trying to heal what's happening, rather than it just thinking about it as pathology? So another key tenet of systems thinking is that the problems of individuals always occur in a larger context. We can't just like look at one person's, thing and think like, oh, they're just sick. It's like, no, we have to look at like their family and their community and the schools they went to and the historical forces and like the larger context. And furthermore, you can see relationships between the smaller and the larger context. So that's this next slide I'm particularly fond of. So actually, as the editor, I'm skipping to 2017 here for a second and quoting Adrienne Marie Brown, who I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she's like one of my living, I've like it helps me knowing that she's out there in the world. So this is a little bit of Adrienne Marie Brown's thinking that's about systems thinking. The contexts always have interconnected patterns. So think about what a fractal is, okay? A fractal is a never-ending pattern. It's infinitely complex, self-similar across different scales. Self-similar across different scales. So think about like these scales, right? Like something that's happening on the individual level could also be happening on an institutional level. We were talking about polarizations before. We have internal polarizations, and there's also polarizations that happen on, like, I don't know, like Gaza, like whatever. You can draw parallels between the things that happen on small and large scales. Fractals are created by repeating a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. So this is Adrienne Marie Brown's thinking. How we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. The patterns of the universe repeat at scale. There is a structured echo that suggests two things. One, that there are shapes and patterns fundamental to our universe. And two, that what we practice at a small scale can reverberate to a large scale. So that's kind of like, before I even tell you anything about the details of systemic family therapists in the 1960s, I want to say that this is a key idea I want to get across to you in this presentation, is that the stuff that happens on a small scale inside of us, in an interpersonal relationship, maybe a therapeutic relationship, can end up having larger scale implications for people, and vice versa. The things that are happening on the large scale end up having an effect on us. And that way of thinking is really different than just like the biological disease model of psychosis. All right. Okay, so this is where we get, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and it's good there's going to be a recording of this, because like, maybe you won't get it all the first time around. You got to go back and look at it, or maybe, but I actually think that this is like, I've yet to see anyone else do this, and so hopefully it's useful, like out in the world. So I'm just going to break down really quickly some systemic family therapy concepts that are going to help inform your understanding of internal family systems, and maybe help inform the way that I don't know, you think about yourself as a human being with other human beings on the planet. When we talk about Gregory Bateson, we're going to talk about strategic family therapy, Virginia Satir, Murray Bowen, Salvador Minuchin. I'll talk real briefly about my experience working on an open dialogue team for a year in New York when I was a social work student. And let's just do it. All right, y'all. So this is where I think that the presentation gets very exciting. So if you want to understand systemic family therapy, you got to know that this guy, Gregory Bateson, was the first person to apply systems thinking to human interaction. Systems thinking was being used in all these other ways of thinking in the 1950s and 60s. But Gregory Bateson, came up with a number of ideas, and his most famous one was called the double-bind theory of schizophrenia. So the double-bind theory is that communication within families can create impossible situations or double binds that lead to distress and confusion, often seen in psychosis. This shows how contradictory messages can foster psychological fragmentation and confusion. All right, so Gregory Bateson. So here's a quote from Mary Olson. Hi, Mary, if you're watching this sometime. Bateson's theory of the double bind came from a theoretical attempt to imagine the kind of interpersonal communication context in which psychotic ideas and symptoms would seem adaptive. Okay, sort of like just say that in plain English. Like sometimes you can be in a situation that makes you fucking crazy and you don't know what to do about it. And like, so you start acting crazy, and then people say that person over there is crazy. But if you look at the situation and what is happening, it makes sense. So that was a theory of the double bind. We'll come back to it. Another piece of language which I think is really important when we're talking about Gregory Bateson's legacy is this idea of the identified patient. So Gregory Bateson viewed the identified patient as a symptom bearer of the family systemic issues, where the individual's behavior reflects the dysfunctions and patterns within the larger family rather than a problem isolated to the individual alone. So basically, I mean, this is the opposite of what they told my mom when I was 18. And she went to a NAMI meeting, and they said your son has a biological illness. It's not your fault. It's a disease just like any other. It's like diabetes. There's medication for it. This worldview is a little more complex. He's saying the identified patient sacrifices himself to maintain the sacred illusion that what the parent says makes sense. Now, it turns out there's these ideas became very unpopular. What I'm saying to you right now became so unpopular that I am guessing that most of you have never even heard them. but like, I think it's important that we reflect on them and think about them. And yeah, so there you go. Okay, so a couple more ideas. So we're going to talk about homeostasis and balance. So it's this basic idea that families resist change to maintain stability, often unconsciously maintaining dysfunctional patterns to avoid perceived threats to the system's balance. And then there's all this work done with strategic family therapy to reframe techniques to change the meaning of problems in a non-pathologizing way, helping family members see problems from a new, more positive perspective. But once again, if we aren't thinking about a family system as a system that tends toward homeostasis, just like any system, we'll probably miss out. We'll probably miss out on some key things. And so here's a quick illustration of circular causality. Okay, so this is the idea in linear causality is, you have a parent and a child. And the parent says, I treat you like a child because you behave like a child, right? And then the child says, I behave like a child because you treat me like a child. So that's the idea of linear causality. Circular causality is when I treat you like a child, you behave like a child, and then I treat you like a child even more, and you behave more like a child. We sure have a vicious cycle going on, don't we? So what you see in circular causality is that it takes being able to step outside the dynamic and see what's going on, to realize that there's a dynamic going on. It's not just, oh, he's acting like a child, or oh, you're treating me like a child. Oh, we're in this together. We're caught in a bit of a loop. Okay, let's keep going. There's a few more things. So I really like, briefly, Virginia Satir, like, was one of these like pioneering family therapists who saw that, symptoms such as those of psychosis are not illnesses in a single person, but rather attempts to resolve conflicts within the system. Attempts to resolve conflicts within the system. I can't say it. I'm going to say it again. Attempts to resolve conflicts within the system. So you think something's an illness, you think something's a disease, but there's something happening that's trying to change the system. You might even be able to look at psychosis in general this way and say, maybe it's not something that we should be viewing as a mental illness, a pathological, biological mental illness. Maybe it's actually an attempt to try and change, and maybe we can treat it differently, if so. Satir believed that people had buried internal resources in a universal life force, and that even parts with extreme roles have a positive intention and the potential for healing. And we're going to come back to this when we talk about the understanding of the self in IFS. Okay, I know this is a lot of info, but it's so rich, and it just keeps getting richer. So here we have this guy, Murray Bowen. This is an amazing story, all right? So like, for me, right, it's 2024, and I'm like just discovering this stuff like in a family therapy textbook in a used bookstore somewhere, and I learned that back in the 1960s, there was this dude who was like at the head of the NIMH, like the NIMH that still exists, that's like, doing all this work on biomarkers and stuff. But in the 1960s, he was the head of the NIMH, and he was bringing whole families to come live like there so he could study them, because he saw that mental health, schizophrenia in particular, this is the language that they were using back then, was a function of family dynamics. Anyway, there are a bunch of them, but two key understandings of Murray Bowen that are going to be useful for us today, and maybe useful for your whole life, is this idea of differentiation of self. Bowen's concept of emotional differentiation is the ability to separate one's own feelings and thoughts from those of family members. He believed that higher differentiation leads to healthier relationships, as individuals can remain connected to their families without being overwhelmed by emotional reactivity. Now, I don't know who's listening to this out there, or what your relationship is like with your families. I hope you have really great relationships with your families, but I can tell you it's like a very common phenomenon for people to have these very enmeshed relationships and not know who's who. Like, like who's the father and who's the son and who's the mother, and who, like everything ends up getting all blended. So this understanding of differentiation of self is critical in us understanding the internal family systems model, which we'll get to in the next section. Transgenerational transmission of trauma. So basically, Bowen back in the 1960s was talking about family patterns, and how if you have a grandparent who had a bunch of unresolved family trauma, that trauma could get directly passed down to you through your parent and to you, and that it was really important to understand those things, and people weren't talking so much like that back in those days. Anyway, there you go, Murray Bowen in 2 minutes. Okay, fine. The last face you'll see on here, Salvador Minuchin. So this guy's like fascinating to me. Like, in 2024, there's a lot of dialogue. People talk about boundaries a lot. We talk about the importance of having healthy boundaries. Well, this was the dude that started talking about boundaries. I think he was working with adolescent boys in Philadelphia, like who were like juvenile delinquents, and working on their family issues. And for him, the pieces that I'm pulling out right now for us to think about you know, in his structural family therapy model, it emphasized the importance of family hierarchies and boundaries, healthy family hierarchies where parents take leadership roles, help resolve issues, while clear boundaries prevent family members from becoming enmeshed. So he also was understanding this thing about mental illness that's like, yeah, maybe it's not just about the individual, it's about the dynamics with people and having clear, not only clear boundaries, but hierarchies, like that actually, when it comes down to it, someone in a family wants to know where they stand in a hierarchy, and they actually want, they want strong, healthy leadership. So that's so we'll come back to that when we're talking about IFS, because that's like actually like a key principle. And his concept of a meshing refers to family members being overly intertwined in each other's lives. And he developed methods to help family members unblend from one another. So hold on to that thought. Okay, here's the last piece. And this is what, once again, this is a personal story. So my first year of social work school, I got this amazing, I got into a program in New York at Silverman School of Social Work School. It's like a night school program. So it's mostly going to school with other people who had been working in the public system for a long time. And I had connections to this program called Parachute, which was basically, it was an experimental program that very much got defunded. Once again, like, does anyone know about Parachute? There's some of you out there probably know about it. But the basic idea is that we were working with folks who had recently come out of the hospital and been diagnosed with a psychotic disorder. And so I spent a year on a team where we would go to people's homes all over Manhattan. And it was like a very diverse group of families, and sit with the people who, you know, like the mothers and the fathers and the uncles and the grandparents and and the piece about open dialogue that I think is worth mentioning here. I mean, there's so much to say. I mean, I could just talk about it for a long time, but the critical piece that I learned as a social work student, really just kind of trying on the role of being in a clinical role, is that it's incredibly, incredibly important when you have a system, when you have a family system, or any system that matter, to have people, like someone who's trusted, who can come in from the outside and observe and reflect back what's going on, you know, from their perspective. And part of what the way open dialogue worked, it was really inspired by like the old family therapy models from like the Ackerman Institute from back in the day, when they would like have a family, and then they would have like a one-way mirrored glass, and then they have like the family therapist in the back, like talking to each other and about it. Basically, open dialogue took that idea, but it took away the one-way mirrored glass. So we were all sitting together having these conversations, and then we would do these reflection moments where, you know, I'd always be with like one or two other people, and we would sit and talk and reflect. Anyway, it was incredibly helpful and useful for a lot of people, and I think we need more of it. And I have an idea for how we could have more of it, and it gets into where we're going to go next. But okay, so what we're going to do now, I have one last slide here. So at the heart of systemic thinking, when we think ecologically, we see that certain values, whether held by individuals, families, or nations, promote the health of the whole system. Values like cooperation, sustainability, and balance align with resilience and harmony. In contrast, exploitative or competitive values disrupt the system's balance, leading to dysfunction in relationship, whether in nature or in human systems. Man, I don't even want to talk about. I'm not going to get into talking about the election. I'm just like, we're not even going to go there. I think the thing but I think that the ability to think systemically on small scales can be really helpful for us in thinking about things on larger scales. And so, with that said, we're going to do our first exercise, and this is the only exercise where I'm actually going to break you up into a group of 3 or 4 But so what we're going to do, and just for 10 minutes, is I'm going to, I'm going to make a group of 3 or 4, and then what you're going to do is one person is going to choose to play the role of a family member expressing a concern. You can choose a parent wanting their child to be more independent, or whatever it is that you want. One person, you self-select here. The other person is going to play the role of another family member reacting to the concern, like the child feeling torn between pleasing the parent and their own need for support. And I just want you to do this for like a few minutes, and then talk about it. And so like notice any conflicting messages or double binds or what comes up. How do these interactions maintain the system's balance or dysfunction? And I think really the thing that's important is like, you know, that the thing is that what I want you to do is 2 people do the role play, but then to have another 2 people or just one person who's noticing it and seeing what's going on. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do this. And the choose your own adventure of this is that if you are like, actually, what the hell are we doing? We can't seem to figure this out. Just talk about, you know, anything that you've learned in the last 20 minutes that I've been sharing. And that's what we're gonna do. So if I can leave this, let me see if I can leave this slide in. I'm gonna repeat it one more time. In pairs, one person will play the role of a family member expressing a concern. Other person plays the role of another family member reacting to the concern. Notice any conflicting messages or double binds. How do these interactions maintain the system's balance or dysfunction? And then once again, the community agreements. This is a practice, right? I mean, like whatever kind of conversation you end up having, I want you to practice staying connected to your calm, compassionate center. If you feel discomfort or the need to withdraw, that's fine. Um, take breaks, approach others' experiences with curiosity. Oh, you all love to all of y'all that like, had to, be risky with strangers on the internet. I'm like, I just threw you right in there. I I I wonder if people could like if people want to put comments in the chat and I will read them and reflect on them. So like someone just wrote, exterior authority to the parent was part of the conflict. What the parent believed was true was used against the child and against the connecting that was possible in the conflict. Yeah, I mean, you know, how we relate to authority, or like what, like a lot of times the way that I understand it, because I do a lot of work where I'm, working with someone, but then I'm also talking to their parents. So much of this is basically, it's a good way to transition as we're transitioning into talking about internal family systems. What someone's own internal relationship with their parts is going to have a huge effect on how they relate to their child or how their child relates to them. Um, the experience was very enlightening, treating it as if a son is fragile and wanting him to be independent. Crazy how crazy how easy it was to role play my overbearing and NPD mom, and that I felt no interest in hearing where my child was coming from, only the agenda that I came with. It's powerful that, like, um parent resented the child hearing and valuing voices. The child resented the parent talking about them with others and judging based on that. Interesting dynamic. Um God, I'm so happy to see some reflections of people having interesting experiences, positive experiences you know, doing these role plays. Request sending the child to bed early due to late nights. The parent had the child's best interest in the request, but the forced nature of the request threatened the child's autonomy, which led to a rebellious overcorrection, which, while protecting the child from being controlled, led the child to identify with the bad behavior. Yep, that sounds very familiar. I found myself just wanting to problem solve with a family member and make it all better, which is definitely a role I play in my own family. Awesome, y'all. Well, thank you for going there with me. Thank you for going there with me and doing these role plays. I mean, I feel like, it's going to come in handy right now as like we basically just got to the point now where I feel like we're prepared to talk about internal family systems and psychosis. Uh, okay. So let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Oh, I'll just say right now, this image, I first saw this image when I did my level 1 IFS training, and it's Mariel Pastor's image, and she was my level 1 trainer, and I really like it because what it does is it helps me remember. You know what? But before I'm skipping too far ahead. Let me get right into it. Okay, let's do our introduction to internal family systems. Okay, straight up, we're jumping right in. Okay, so Richard Schwartz, whose name you might recall because I was showing you a textbook that he wrote in the 1980s about family therapy, began his career as a systemic family therapist and an academic. Grounded in systems thinking, Dr. Schwartz developed internal family systems in response to clients' descriptions of various parts within themselves. So basically, this guy was in Chicago, and he was a family, he was like really gung-ho, about systemic family therapy. And he was working with, I believe it was young women diagnosed with eating disorders, and he wasn't having any luck doing the family work, getting people together and understanding the dynamics. And then he he started hearing his clients say, well, there's a part of me that feels like this, and then there's another part of me that feels like this. And Dr. Schwartz took his understanding of systemic thinking and systemic family therapy and started using it in a way to be able to basically like notice that his individual clients had an internal system of parts that were relating to each other. So that's how it started. He focused on the relationships among these parts and noticed that there were systemic patterns to the way they were organized across clients. So it wasn't just like some random, people he was talking to were having these weird experiences talking about their inner worlds. There was actually like patterns in the same way that I was showing you that slide with the fractals and talking about how from the small to the large, there are these ways that systems work. But this is the critical piece, and we're going to spend some time on this in this workshop. He also found that when the client's parts felt safe and were allowed to relax, the clients would experience spontaneously the qualities of confidence, openness, and compassion that Dr. Schwartz came to call the self. He found that when in that state of self, clients would know how to heal their parts. So actually, let's go back to this image right here. So the idea is, I'll jump into it in a minute, but the idea is that everybody in this model that I'm transmitting to you right now, everybody has a self. And that self is something that like is the natural leader of our system. So here we go. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 5 basic assumptions of the IFS model. And we're going to start with number 1, which is that it is the nature of the mind to contain an indeterminate number of subpersonalities. I don't know if anyone is getting the reference here, but this is from a TV show called Sense8 that I really loved watching a few years ago. It's about these 8 people from different parts of the world that are actually all the same person, but they connect with each other. It's a very IFS like story. They got to go and fight the forces of evil. Okay, so it's the nature of the mind to contain an indeterminate number of subpersonalities. So this can sound, to someone who hasn't been thinking like this for, like that, and has gotten used to this idea of inner multiplicity, you could sound like you could be talking about like, oh, do you have multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder? Um, and the idea is no, it's actually natural for everybody to have multiple parts. And that once you start looking at it, kind of like in the way if you have like a prism and you have white light and the white light goes into the prism and then you can see the colors of the rainbow. It's like if you look closely, you realize actually there's a bunch of different things going on inside of us all the time. In fact, uh, most of the time when you think that you're thinking, it's actually just parts of you talking to each other, and it's good to get to know them. I'll leave it at that. Number two, everybody has a self. So this list on the left here comes in real handy when you're first studying IFS, because this is basically this is the grounding. This is like these 8 C's of self-leadership: calmness, curiosity, connectedness, compassion, clarity, courage, confidence, creativity. It becomes a way that you tune in and you think, okay, well, am I one of these things right now? And if I'm not one of these things, then I'm not in self. So, I think the thing about self is that, well, okay, here, I'll describe it like this. This is a book my kids love. Don't let the pigeon drive the bus. I have to say this to my daughter Lila all the time. Don't let the pigeon drive the bus. She like she's like, she wants to be in charge, but like, who's in charge? I'm in charge. I'm like the dad. They're 3. But the first person that ever explained IFS to me many years ago, she said, think about it like this. Imagine when you're having a hard time, it's as if you're on a school bus full of screaming children. And the really important question is, who's driving the bus? Like, it's okay to have a bunch of parts or a bunch of like strong emotions that you're having that are like freaking out. But the question is like, who's actually like, who's in control? Who's looking at them? And I think a really good way to think about this is to think about being the self being the conductor of an orchestra. And that really we have inside of us, we have a bunch of different parts, and they all want to be seen, they all want to be heard, and it's the conductor's job to be able to like know like how to play the music. So some basic things about the self is that everybody has it, which is deep. If you see, this is the thing, you like, if you're someone out there is listening to this and has never heard what I'm saying to you before, I'm like steeped in it. I think about this all the time. But if this is the first time that you're thinking about this idea of having a self, the idea is that everyone has it. Everyone has a self. And it's not the same as like, I mean, there's a lot to learn from attachment therapy, from attachment thinking. I mean, I feel like in my therapeutic work, like I understand a lot about human relationships and stuff from studying attachment theory. But a difference in IFS thinking is that if you're using the IFS framework, you don't think that you needed a parent when you were very young to like create yourself for you, or to like allow that part to grow. No, the idea is no matter how messed up your childhood was, no matter what you've been through, you have a self, and that self is fundamentally curious, compassionate, creative, courageous, calm, feels connected to something much larger than itself. Like it's there. And one of the key pieces of doing this work is that the more you can find yourself and see from self and be self-led, it allows you to see other people's selves. So that's one of the things that you learn in this model, is that if you're led by your parts, you just see other people's parts. But when you're in self, you see yourself. Anyway, it can't be damaged. It's the natural leader, and it has no power that is not granted by parts. Whenever I hear that, I think about my kids. and just how like I can be like whatever it is that I want to get done. If they're not down with it, they will figure out a way to make it so that we like I have to be a good leader. Basically, being a parent, that's the big thing is being a parent. You have to figure out how to you're basically the self for the system. Okay, there's this really key idea. So if there's like if you're taking notes, or if you're watching this and you're like, hey, I really want to learn the IFS model. I want to understand the basics of the IFS model so that it seems like it's going to be really helpful. This concept of unblending is incredibly important and incredibly basic to it. And so we talk about blending. Blending is when the feelings and beliefs of one part become entangled with another part, or the self. When blended parts become extreme, their reactivity obscures self-energy and thwarts the healing process. Now, I don't know if you heard it in there when I said it, but does that not sound a little bit like Murray Bowen talking about differentiation of self and a family? Does that not sound like Salvador Minuchin talking about like the importance of not being blended? Except what we're talking about is inside ourselves. We're talking about these parts. You don't know what you're thinking. You don't know what you're feeling because your parts are all blended together. Unblending is a core IFS skill that helps to differentiate parts from each other and from the self. Once a part is able to unblend, continue working through a client's self. Ultimately, parts control how much they blend or unblend. So in my role, when I'm playing the role of an IFS therapist, a lot of what I'm doing is helping people build relationships to their parts, getting to know their parts, listening to what their parts are saying. And in order to do that, they have to be able to unblend from their part. And they're like, yeah, I feel, this anger, something happened. I just feel really angry. Wait, what is it? What is it? Oh, it turns out like, oh, I have this part that's angry about something that just happened, but actually underneath that, there's this younger part that's still pissed off about something that happened a really long time ago. Anyway, the ability to blend in and unblend is critical in the IFS model. Okay, so we're talking about the five things I'm going to teach you right now. Number 3, the non-extreme intention of each part is something positive for the individual. So, this is the thing. If you when you start doing parts work, what inevitably happens is you find you're like, I'm gonna back up real quick and just say this. When I say doing parts work, what I'm actually talking about is like you, the person I'm talking to right now, like sitting down and either with another person who's like, feel like is a solid person you trust, or on your own, doing what is called a U-turn, or like basically like there's the world outside, but what happens if we go inside? What happens if we go inside and look at what's going on in there? And I would say, I could speak from personal experience and just being around for a few years. There's a lot of people that don't want to have anything to do with what's going on inside them because it's too fucking scary in there. And so there's a real fear. There's like pain. There's like things that they like don't want to be thinking about. So they do whatever they can to check out or whatever. Okay, I had to say that because when I say the non-extreme intention of each part is something positive for the individual, what I'm saying is I'm assuming that you are having this ability to go inside and feel what's going on and notice that you have like multiple parts, and that you might have some part that seems like really like I don't know. When I was in my 20s, like in between getting locked up in psych hospitals, I would get these voices in my head. They weren't like it wasn't like I didn't think they were coming from outside. I knew they were my thoughts, but the thoughts were so awful. They were like basically like the worst things I could possibly think up to think, like they were oh, they were racist and misogynistic and violent and whatever. I just like, and I couldn't, and the thoughts were driving me crazy because I would have a thought, some terrible thought about something like hurting children or something like that. And then I would have another thought that was like, you're what a terrible person you are. Like if anyone knew you were having these thoughts, no one would ever have anything to do with you. You would be ostracized. And so I'd have this like internal world of these extreme ass parts that were like having, basically like playing out some like really intense psychotic stuff. And it took being able to, I don't know, find it. I finally found like a therapist that I trusted. Like I could talk about it some, and then it became easier to talk about it. Now I'll fucking get up in front of, how many of you are watching this? Like I'll tell you all about my like terrible, scary racist thoughts I had when I was in my 20s. But I think the thing is like in this model, in this IFS model, the key piece of it, and this holds it together for me when I'm working with other people or myself, like you have to look at whatever you're looking at, however awful, the part seems, like what it's saying seems so terrible. You have to see that they're actually like good, they're like actually like everyone in there is good. There's no bad parts. There's a book, you should read it. It's called No Bad Parts. This is the basic idea of it. And the idea is that when we can get to know the parts of ourselves that like are in the shadows, and make friends with them, oh, the wonderful things we can do. The things we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, because we'd be like all trapped in our little, labyrinths. Anyway, the non-extreme intention of each part is something positive for the individual. The parts are actually all mean good, even the ones that are super extreme. Okay, as we develop, our parts form a complex system of interactions internally, much like a family or group of people who are polarized and form alliances and hierarchies. So what you'll find if you do the U-turn and you go in there and you start looking at what's going on with your parts, you realize, oh my goodness, there's all these parts in there. There's like, I can't talk about what's going on in your head. I can tell you plenty about what's going on in my head. There's like areas where like they have no idea. Like one part, it's almost like there's like a I think of like the Berlin Wall or something like that. Okay, World War II ends and then they put up the wall and then there's people on both sides of the wall, but they don't talk to each other and they form different, like that's what there's like stuff like that. And it's happening for a lot of us. A lot of us have these like complex systems of interactions internally, much like a family or a group of people who are polarized or form alliances and hierarchies. And if you can get to know them, you can depolarize what's going on. But in order to do that, you have to have enough perspective. Like me is picture me as the young social work student going into people's homes. I didn't, I didn't know those people, but somehow by being really curious and compassionate, like I could help a complex family dynamic. And what I'm basically saying to you, and one of the reasons that I love this model, and I think it's like so beautiful, really, is that the idea is that you, like, when I'm working with people, they're not coming to me and I'm not like curing them of anything. I'm not, I'm teaching them how to be their own therapist, basically. That's it appeals to the part of me that's like that comes from the peer support world. So I like that's the deal. Okay, and then finally, changes in the internal system will affect changes in the entire system and vice versa. So if you go back to that slide, here is a beautiful fractal, but if you go back to that slide with the individual and then family and then community and like the basically, this is a fancy way of saying if you do your healing work, things will change. You will start seeing things differently than you saw them before. And that will change things. That's basically the idea. Okay. All right, we're at the exercise part, and I'm gonna lead you through it. Um, so this is what we're gonna do. So I want to direct your attention to this image on the left. I got it from a I don't know who the artist is, but I got it from an IFS workbook. So a part in the seat of consciousness. So there we have like a little kid who's like, you know, all like stamping her feet and all angry. And then we have self in the seat of consciousness. And then so we have like a grown woman who's like shining a flashlight, it's like, so this is what I want to get you to do in this with this exercise, which I'm getting from the introduction to IFS, is to notice what's going on inside of you. And then yeah, okay. So let's just jump right into it. Okay. Okay. So becoming aware of inner family relationships. Take a few moments to think about the relationships you've formed with your different thoughts, emotions, or inner voices. The following is a list of parts that most people experience and sometimes feel oppressed by. After you read each one, consider how you relate to it, how you feel towards it, what you do or say inside when you experience it, and how successfully you've exiled it from your life, and how much your relationship with it affects your life. Okay, so I'm taking this straight out of that intro to IFS book. Okay, so here we go. So I'm just going to read. I'm going to read to you a number of these like examples, and just see what comes up for you as I read them. And try and just tune in and see what's going on. Like maybe notice what's happening in your body. Okay. So the inner voice that criticizes your appearance or performance. The inner voice that criticizes your appearance or performance. Anxiety that freezes your mind in high performance situations. The urge to eat or drink too much. Jealous or possessive feelings about your partner. Yearning for intimacy. Worries that flash worst case scenarios in your mind about the future. Grief about someone who has died or left you a nagging sense of worthlessness. The voice that tells you that you're not working hard enough and won't let you relax. Fear that keeps you from taking social risks and inhibits your liveliness. The urge to care for everyone and neglect yourself. The anger that surges forth when you feel hurt by someone. All right. Okay. So, okay. So find a quiet, comfortable place. Hopefully you can do this. Find a quiet, comfortable place where you can sit or lie down. Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths, allowing your body to relax with each exhale. As you continue to breathe deeply, bring your attention to the present moment. Notice the sensations in your body, the weight of your body on the chair or the ground, the feeling of your breath moving in and out. Take a moment to connect with a sense of calmness and presence inside of you. This is yourself, the part of you that is curious, compassionate, and open. Just rest in this awareness for a few breaths. Now, gently Invite one of your protective parts to come forward. You don't need to know exactly which part will appear. It could be a part that you're already familiar with, or it could be one that's been in the background. Let this protector know that you're open to connecting with it. You're not here to judge or change it, but simply to listen and understand. Just sit with the intention of welcoming this protector to show itself. As you continue to breathe, notice if you sense the presence of this part. You might feel it somewhere in your body, a tightness, a heaviness, or maybe a sense of energy. Or you might have an image, a memory, or a thought comes to mind. Allow whatever shows up to be there without trying to force it or push it away. If the part feels distant, that's okay. You're creating a space for it to come forward at its own pace. When you feel the presence of this protector, take a moment to silently acknowledge it. You might say internally, I see you. I know you're there, and I'm here to listen. Now ask this part a gentle question. What are you trying to protect me from? What are you trying to protect me from? Allow the answer to arise in its own time. You might hear a response, see an image, or feel a certain emotion. Just be open to whatever the protector wants to share with you, knowing that its intention is to keep you safe in some way. If the protector has shared something with you, thank it for doing so. Let it know that you're grateful for its effort to protect you, even if its methods haven't always been helpful. See if you can feel compassion for this part, knowing that it carries a burden of responsibility. You can ask it another question, such as, how long have you been doing this for me? Or what do you need from me right now? Listen carefully to its answers. The protector may simply want to be acknowledged, or it might want to feel appreciated for its role. After you've listened to the protector, let it know that you, as yourself, are here to help. You might say, I'm here with you now. You don't have to do this all on your own. You could ask the protector if it's willing to let you help carry the burden. Reassure it that you're not trying to get rid of it, but that you want to work together to find a better balance. Notice how the protector responds to this. It may feel ready to step back a little, or it might need more time. Whatever it shares is okay. As you near the end of your time together, thank the protector for showing up today and sharing its experience with you. Let it know that you'll check in with it again in the future and that you're committed to working together. Gently invite the protector to step back now, letting it know that it's safe to do so. As it steps back, take a few more deep breaths, bringing your attention back to your body in the present moment. When you feel ready, slowly begin to move your body. Wiggle your fingers, stretch, shift in your seat. Let yourself come fully back to the room around you. Open your eyes when you're ready. Take a moment to reflect on how you feel after meeting this protector. You may want to write down any thoughts or insights that came up during this brief meditation. I'll give you another minute. So there's this other very useful term that I've learned in my time in IFS land, and it's this language of trailheads. So yeah, I mean, I think this like Dick Schwartz like came up with this language. It's basically a trailhead is a starting point, a clue, an indication that something's up and we need to investigate further. So, um, you know, mm, when I'm talking to someone and trying to understand what's going on with them, what's going on with their inner system, what's going on in their lives, they'll say all kinds of things to me. And you know, there'll be lots of different trailheads. And as a trail, like the language of a trailhead is basically like you're standing at the beginning of a trail and you could choose to walk down that trail, or you could choose to not, and you could keep walking, walk down some other trail. But it can be good to it can be good to know that the trailheads are there for you to look at, so for you to go down. So like that golden thread image that I showed you at the beginning when we started. I mean, I think the thing about keeping track, the thing about writing things down, is that we're all complex beings, So anyway, I hope that you had some kind of experience that was at least a trailhead to something else. Um I how are we doing? How are we doing on time? Hold on a second. I'm gonna stop. Oh, it's 1:37. You know, I'm gonna give you all a 10-minute break. I'm gonna give you all a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna come back and do this, and then we're gonna like jump into something else that's like intense. Like good intense. I think like really good intense. But why don't you come back in 10 minutes exactly? Okay, this is what I'm gonna do, because I want to make sure that we get to all the stuff that I think is important to get to. I'm going to tell you what this exercise is, but we're not going to do it. So because we're going to do another exercise after this. So um, this might be like the most practical thing you learned from this training. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about speaking for parts. So basically, the idea that comes in handy in my life all the time, is being able to understand, being able to communicate to somebody else, that that I'm I'm speaking for a part rather than speaking from a part. So um, I might, you know, I'll just use like a strong example. I might be really angry. I might be really angry at someone. Um, But it sounds really different if I say, I'm really angry with you, than if I say, there's this part of me that's really angry with you. You get what I'm saying right here? The idea is like um, being able to speak for a part and say, I just, I feel like there's this part of me that wants you all to know that I I put a bunch of work into this presentation, and it wants you to know that. It's like, great, yeah, Sasha, that's all great and everything. Um, that's a part or whatever. Anyway, the beautiful thing is if you can do this, like it's a great way to depolarize conflict, and when you can talk about parts. So it creates safety in a group and in relationships. It enables us to identify what's most important to a part and express it clearly. It brings self-energy to a part before feelings are expressed. It enables our parts to be expressed in a way that's respectful to others. It increases the possibility for connection between the person's parts and self. Okay, you know what? I just convinced myself doing this. I'm like we're going to do this exercise right now. Okay, you have 10 minutes. This is how it's going to go. I'm going to break you up into pairs. I want you to identify a part. Take a moment to identify a part that you think is active right now. It could be a protective part, a part feeling stressed, a part that's like, oh God, 3 hour long webinar. I'm like exhausted. I'm sick of listening to this guy. Or a part that's curious about this exercise. The partner shares, one person speaks for their part, starting with, a part of me feels like, and expresses the part's thoughts and feelings, concerns using I statements. It's a part of me that feels like this. The other person listens actively, reflecting back what they heard without judgment or advice. And now you switch roles. I mean, that's it. The idea is to like practice staying in self energy, being curious and calm and compassionate, and being able to speak for something in yourself that's like a part. It's another way of learning how to unblend. I can unblend from a part by talking about it, so that's the idea. I'm gonna give you 10 minutes to do it. I'm gonna put you in pairs. Welcome back, y'all. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. And Leia did the best to like, you know, to pull it together. Yay. Okay. I'm seeing evidence of cool conversations in the chat. That makes me happy. Um, all right. We're gonna do this last piece. All right, so y'all, I think what we're gonna do is I'm going to do this presentation. I was planning on doing another breakout group, but I don't think we're going to do any more breakout groups for this training. I think we're just gonna we're gonna go through this section, and then we'll have question and answer. So please, post your questions, and that's what we'll do. Okay, so this is like a critical piece. I mean, basically, I thought long and hard before I developed this workshop. I was like, okay, I know I only have a little bit of time. What is the critical stuff that I need to make sure these folks are going to get about internal family systems? And what I'm about to teach you is like basic 101 stuff that will help you. Someone posted a question about parts work earlier on, and like the difference between parts work and IFS. People talk about IFS as parts work, but what makes IFS is that there's this understanding that everybody has a self, and that there are these three major groups of parts. And so I'm gonna teach them to you right now if you don't already know it. Okay, so props to Mariel Pastor for this diagram. You can go back and check it out. But this is like summing up what I'm about to teach you, right? We're going to talk about managers, firefighters, and exiles, and then in the context of the self. And I hope that it serves you well in life. Okay. So let's talk about protectors and what it means to be a protector. So in the internal family systems model, we have two types of protectors. We have managers and we have firefighters. And they can both be protecting the same things, but doing them in very different ways. So let's get into it. So now remember what we're talking about. We're talking about our internal worlds here, and we're saying and this is not like it's just a way of talking about like the emotions and the feelings that we have and understanding that they exist as parts. So what are the qualities of a manager? A manager is usually risk adverse and concerned with safety, concerned about being overwhelmed emotionally. Their primary voices or thoughts we hear most often, and sometimes over-identify with this as if they are ourself. So this is, a lot of times when we're thinking, when we're doing things, a lot of times the the things people like about us, the things that, or like if we had, I man, you know, what was my managerial system like for me to like get it together to make this 3 hour training? It takes my managers. I mean, it's like I like to be as self-led as possible, but it's like I learned to do things a certain way. Um, and they can be more or less burdened. Anyway, a lot of times our managers are kind of like our primary voices, you know. Um, Managers are trying to make sense of the world with interpretations and by creating narratives we live by. So like a lot of times when we're like the stories that we tell about what's going on, it's manager parts that are doing it. Repeating stories about how life should be according to our family or origin, school, culture, and so on. Manager parts. The thing about the self, if we go back to like, in contrast, the self perspective is like never has an agenda. It's an interesting thing when you're trying to figure out like what's the manager and what's self. Anyway, that's the thing with managers. We'll come back to this. What I want to talk about in the context of psychosis, and I can talk about this in a very personal way. I learned, I know, like there's not a lot written about this in the IFS literature, but I learned about it when I did my level 1 training, is that we have parts oftentimes that are self-like parts, meaning we think that the parts are ourself. We think that like no, this is me. This is I'm like I'm the center here. But then it turns out that they're not. They're a part, and we can be very blended with them. And it's now this is going to sound like if you're just getting introduced to this way of thinking. I'll give you this metaphor. Okay. So Copernicus was the guy in the 1400s that did the equations to figure out that the that the sun didn't revolve around the earth, that the earth, revolved around the sun, which changed everything, right? I mean, it's like a whole different way of looking at what the like our relationship to the solar system. And in many ways, when I think about my own self-like parts, that like the way that I distinguish what's a self-like part, and let me just be very clear, self-like parts, they're managers. They're like they're like they might not necessarily be risk averse or concerned with safety, but they're definitely trying to make sense of the world. And I have some pretty intense parts that like have some like pretty grandiose ideas about like, the universe and myself in relationship to it. I think I developed them young when I was like basically like, trying to protect myself from a lot of pain. But the Copernican realization is the realization, oh, wait, it's not me. I'm not the one who's in charge of everything. Like, actually, there's something much larger. And actually, this is a really critical IFS point. So when Dick Schwartz talks about the ego, so like the ego, if you're studying most other psychological models that talk about internal systems, like the ego is like the center, that's making the decisions. What Dick Schwartz says is that the ego is actually just a bunch of managers. It's not and that really we want to be self-led. And so it's a deeper conversation we can't really delve deep into, but it's this idea of like who's actually in charge here. And what would it look like if we understood that there was like something larger in charge that wasn't just a bunch of managers thinking they knew what was up. So anyway, self-like parts in the Copernicus realization. Okay, firefighters. So this is the other type of manager. I'm sorry, this is the other type of protector part. So in contrast to managers who were like, trying to play it really safe, firefighters protectively spring into action whenever the feared emotion and memories from other parts, especially the more wounded exiles, get activated or threatened to overwhelm. Their strategies douse or escape the fiery path. That's why they're called firefighters. Now, like the classic firefighter is, an addiction, right? So something that where you're just like, okay, that's it. I don't even want to even try and feel something. I'm gonna like douse it in something else. So some examples are like soothers, watching a series of episodes after a stressful day, distractors, scrolling on social media, um, numbers, substance abuse, binge eating, self-harming, sex addiction, and explosive anger. So like anger is a firefighter, like that. I don't know if you're like this or someone like this in your life who like gets really angry because it's a way of not trying not to feel. Okay, so there's like the big missing piece from everything I've just said to you, um, is this. So we'll go here and we'll come back. So in a lot of ways, it probably makes sense to start with exiles because, inevitably our systems are based around exiles. I mean, are like the whatever wounded parts we have that we haven't healed, like everything else is going to be trying to um, protect them. So when we talk about protectors, that language of protectors is a language of um, like protecting the inner system, making sure the exiles don't come out. So what are exiles? Exiles are our most sensitive, innocent, open, and intimacy-seeking parts. They feel the impact of attachment injuries and other traumas most deeply. They carry the memories, sensations, and emotions of those devaluing events. And when triggered, they may flood the person with their burden, pain, shame, or terror. So my experience, personal and with a lot of people that I've worked with, is that, if you have unresolved trauma, if you like things that happened when you're really young that got buried, kind of pushed into a closet. I mean, that's the word exile is like the idea of exiling something from your system. We can't even take it in. It's like Carl Jung talking about the shadow. What makes it the shadow? It's like, well, we don't even know it's there. It's like it's something that's really a a part of us, but we haven't integrated it. So the thing about everything that I've just said about, the protective system, talking about managers, talking about self-like parts, talking about firefighters, is that they're all connected. They're all connected, So here's a quote from James Baldwin that I find really beautiful. I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. So if you think about it, it's like, okay, there's this relationship. There's like the pain is what the driving force. But what it's doing is it's like you know you have to hate. You have to hate. There has to be that firefighter that's like, full of hatred. Because if you were to dig underneath it, you realize, oh, there's something under here that's really painful. Um, So, in the context of psychosis, in the context of like what we're talking about here, the really important thing to hold on to, I think, is that psychosis is often we what what a more kind of biological pathological model would see as like a brain disease. In the IFS model, we look at it and we see, oh, there's relationships between these parts. There's exiled parts and there's protectors that are doing things to try and keep themselves safe. And so one of those things might be you might have you might have a part that like becomes delusional or even, you know, paranoid, you know, because there's like a space. It's like easier to kind of come like weave a kind of inner narrative than it is to deal with some underlying pain. That's the basic idea. And if we can get underneath the surface and kind of um, tease apart the parts and build up enough self energy to be able to witness the kinds of things that people suffer with, it's there's an unbinding that takes place. There's a, you know, we can go back to that language of Gregory Bateson from earlier in the, you know, in this presentation where he talks about the double bind. Okay, so there's this thing that happens in my family when I'm young. I internalize it, and then I keep it. It's still there. You know, it's like it's I've gone on. Maybe I'm an adult, but I'm still doing these things that you know, have to do with like the people that raised me and the environment that I was in. And the beauty of IFS, and actually what I'd say about that is that, you know, I didn't really go into it when we were talking about systemic family therapy, but one of the critiques of systemic family therapy was that it was good at critiquing things. It could critique a family and say like, oh, these are all the dynamics that are going on, but it wasn't that great at doing something about it, you know, like that was, and there wasn't the and in fact, part of its downfall was that because it was critical of the family, um, when the biopsychiatric model rose to dominance, it partnered with, you know, family advocacy organizations like NAMI, and they created this new narrative that was like mental illness, it's not your fault, it's a disease like any other, like diabetes, you know, and there you know, there's medications that you can take. But meanwhile, like all the stuff got kind of like pushed under the rug, as it were, like, you know, like exiled, you know, it's like there's like a different form of like exiling that took place. And so all these people diagnosed with these like severe, serious mental illnesses they didn't even get the benefit of getting to talk about family therapy, because it was like, no, you have this mental illness we're going to treat with drugs or whatever. Anyway, exiles are inside of us, but they're also like they're things in society that get exiled, and there's like similar dynamics that at play about like, you know, trying to protect them. What's underneath, if you want to dig down underneath of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, like what are the wounds there that are like getting replicated, you know, like and played out on all of us who have to like, you know, like there was like all this harm that got committed, and then there was no unraveling of it, you know, and it's actually quite similar to what happens, you know, to someone who gets diagnosed with like paranoid schizophrenia, you know. No one wants to deal with folks like that. No one wants to deal with the severely mentally ill people, you know. Monthly injections. Okay, three group ecology. So now you should know we've, you know, reached the end of we're wrapping up this presentation. And so I started off and I showed you this slide at the beginning, and I said by the end you're gonna understand what the slide means, and so we'll just review the idea in the internal family systems model is that everybody has a self, um, and the self is the natural leader of the system. And then we also have protectors and exiles, and every part that we have in the IFS system we can think of in one of these ways, and that makes it really useful actually, because then you can get to know these different parts. And what we didn't really cover today that's like deeply exciting if this is the kind of thing that you're into, is that in this model, if you build up enough trust with another person and you're doing IFS work with them, you can actually go and get to know parts, discover what kind of burdens that they have, and then build up enough self energy to unburden the things that they're holding on to. And it's a very almost shamanic way of working with people, because you actually do a ritual where you help people take the things that they're holding on to, their burdens, and throw them in the ocean or burn them or set them off, into the sky or bury them in the ground. And the idea is that all of these parts that we have are parts that um, a lot of times are like actually pretty young. And so even though they're using adult voices and we think they're grown up, they're usually kind of like personified um, children, or I'm sorry, but like parentified children, like, kids that basically had to take on too much responsibility when they were too young. So there you go. That's the three group ecology. It'll serve you well if you want to be doing more work in this realm. Now, this is the pair share that I would do if we had a working breakout room situation. But basically, I think it's really important to reflect on inner polarization. So I guess I'll just ask you to reflect on an inner polarization, like something inside of you that's in conflict. Basic examples like safety versus risk, or logic versus emotion, or isolation versus connection. And then, I'm not going to break, you have to talk about it, but the polarization and depolarizing is such a huge part of this work. And you can do it in groups, like you can come into a group that's in conflict and help them depolarize, but you can also depolarize yourself. So that's the basic idea there. Okay, so here's my conclusion. So IFS provides an alternative, non-pathologizing view of psychological distress as seen through the lens of multiplicity. Many psychiatric symptoms and diagnoses are manifestations, acute or chronic, of the way a person's subpersonalities have organized to help him or her survive. So, some examples of this. So, managers dominate the systems of people who are chronically depressed. If you've ever struggled with depression, clinical depression, if you've had yourself or you've had someone in your life, often they have like these voices in their heads that are constantly talking, like very critical voices that are telling them all the things that they should be doing, and that's that's like a key piece of it. Exiles dominate those who experience bouts of intense fear. So people who feel like extreme fear, are like, oftentimes their exiles are flooding their system. They're getting past the managers and the firefighters, and they're like dominating the system. And firefighters dominated people who have problems with addiction. And that's pretty classic. Like what are the parts that show up? It's like the part that just wants to get high, or the part that's just drinking. And to be able to like get in to someone's system, you have to do work, to unblend and understand. And inevitably there's like exiles there that are like, hurting. But in individuals experiencing psychosis, the internal system may become so polarized that parts, especially protectors and exiles, take on extreme roles, blurring the boundaries between inner and outer reality. I mean, at the heart, that is what that's like what I'm telling y'all. Um, that is my understanding of how we talk about what is called psychosis, from an IFS perspective. And then this is a quote from the IFS textbook. The length of treatment in IFS is indexed to the system's level of trust for the self and how polarized parts are, rather than to the severity of the client's symptoms. So the more relationship you have to self, the quicker you're going to be able to get better from whatever you're struggling with. Okay, so I have a few final slides that don't have any pretty don't have any pretty images. It's kind of like when you're like driving along the road and then all of a sudden it gets all rocky at the end. Reframing psychosis and systemic thinking. So reframing psychosis, it's critical that psychosis is understood as a complex internal process rather than a purely pathological state. It reflects the system's attempts to manage overwhelming emotional burdens. The role of systemic thinking. Concepts like double binds, circular causality, and homeostasis offer a foundation for understanding relational dynamics of psychosis and should be rediscovered and adapted for the future. So I think that's like a critical piece that I think about all the time. What would it look like if we actually like took some of these older ideas seriously in the context of psychosis? Yeah, okay, and then this is in the internal family systems textbook and an image, Mario Pastor's image of the unburdened internal system. So if you look closely, you'll see this is like what it looks like once you unburden your managers, firefighters, and exiles and self. I mean, really, the idea is that we are we're trying to unburden to the point that we were self-led and free, and we have a loving relationship with our parts, and our parts have relationships with each other. That's why when we go back to the slide of Sense8, I love that image of like all of these people who actually are like of the same being, but spread out all over the world. So IFS is a bridge. It's a powerful model that internalizes family system dynamics within individual's parts, helping reorient towards self-leadership and harmony. One key to understanding psychotic processes is that self-like parts may believe they're central, but true balance comes from self-leadership. Techniques such as unblending, building self-to-part relationships, working with polarizations, and unburdening are key strategies in IFS. These tools foster internal harmony by helping individuals better understand and engage with their parts, leading to reduced distress and promoting healing. And through these methods, we can help individuals create more balance within their system, decreasing the intensity of overwhelming experiences, often linked to psychosis. And then finally, by combining systemic thinking with the internal family systems model, we have the opportunity to move beyond traditional symptom management towards a deeper understanding of internal complexity and pathways to healing for what gets called psychosis. This shift can be supported through evidence-based research that demonstrates the effectiveness of these approaches, while also empowering grassroots community organizing and visionary peer support networks to lead the way outside of the system, which I think is the thought that I will leave you with, which is go back here. The thought that I'll leave you with, actually here, the thought that I will leave you with is that we can use this work in a clinical context, and I think about the first episode psychosis program that I worked in and how transformative it would be if like people were doing IFS systemic style work in an environment like that. But I also think about my years working in the Icarus project, where what we were doing was it was really peer-based community organizing. It was like mutual aid, peer support. And I think that the IFS model, this language, and these tools would just be wonderful additions to the kind of peer work that is happening out there. And I'm interested in all of those things. So there you go. That's my that's my presentation for you without doing the breakout rooms. And if you have any questions, I'll look in the chat or I'll answer them.
Yay! Lots of hearts and clapping emojis happening right now. Obviously, everybody has enjoyed that session as much as I did. That was great, Sasha. Thank you so much. 2.5 hours, but it felt like a lot shorter. I love the way you shared your story. Thank you for that. It's always an honor for somebody to share their story with a group of other people. And it really, I think, brought everything to life and gave it context and humanity. Although I think IFS has inherent humanity in the way it it views people's issues and things they have experienced. So we do have quite a few questions already, and I'm sure more will happen because as soon as we start, people want their questions answered. So please go ahead. If you are watching and questions have come to your mind, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box so we can get to them. I think we should start with like the real basic one. Will PowerPoint slides be shared?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll definitely share these PowerPoint slides. But I want to get to a way more juicy question someone posted, which is, can you talk more about how to reach a person who's in psychosis and deeply enmeshed into delusional beliefs? I mean, that's a good question, right?
Yeah, we have quite a few people saying how do you implement this in the throes of psychotic episodes? So a few people have asked similar questions.
Well,
what say you? How are you implementing it with folks experiencing these things?
well, here's here's what here's what I want to say, that and it's like, this is coming from, so what, like, I said I'm gonna be 50 in a couple months, and I got diagnosed. I ended up like in the system, in and out of the system, starting when I was 18. And like, the power of being part of the Icarus project for years, like, and just having realizing that there was a bunch of other people who had the kind of experiences that I had, um, did something for me that made it so that I just like, I don't feel as alone in the world as I think. I think that like psychosis can be a very lonely feeling. It can be incredibly isolating when you're there. You just feel like no one understands what you're going through. Um, and I think when, if we want to use the language of like firefighters, when in people's like, intense, like intense kind of like people can like create like a world around them that can make it really hard to reach. So I think that that's like a really good question. The way that I'd answer it is that I think why, it's like very common for people who are like working as therapists, that they don't want to work with people who are diagnosed with psychotic disorders, or they're scared of it, or or they have that, there's the stigma, and then there's this, I think, the fear. I think the fear is probably like way more important to the dynamic than the stigma. It's like, I don't, I don't understand what the hell is going on with this person. This is what I would say to you. So this is like the first part of the way I'd answer your question. If you're using the IFS model, you're practicing it yourself, you have an understanding that you have a self, and that the person that you're working with has a self, and that like, whatever it is that's coming up that they're having such a hard time with, um, like, if you're in self, as they say, you'll, rather than getting triggered by it or scared off by it, or like, or feeling despondent because there's nothing you can do about it or whatever, you just like get real curious, and you notice what's going on. And that curiosity, it sounds like, I'm not talking, it's not a magic trick. I'm saying, I'm like, this is a human, I think this is something about like the human tendency. If someone is genuinely curious and in self and unguarded and not worried about what the other person is going to say, well, amazing things can happen. And sometimes it can take a lot of time. But the thing is, if you if you believe that, like, if someone has a self in there and it's like hard to reach, you know, you're like, okay, well, we'll just keep working at it, you just keep working at it. So, I mean, I think that there's scenarios that I think are really particularly challenging when people are like, I don't know. I mean, some of the stuff that happened to me, like when I don't know who would have been able to reach me when I was like 26 years old and running down the street, smashing out windows with my bare fists and bleeding all down my arms and thinking the world had ended and stuff. Like, no one was gonna like reach me really. Um, But I guess what I'd say is when I was 18 years old and I had a psychotic breakdown and the police found me walking on the subway tracks and I thought the world was about to end or whatever, what was happening to me when I was 18 years old was really important. And what they did to me was just like put me on a whole bunch of Haldol, you know?
Mhm.
And so that process that I was in didn't have a chance to complete itself. There was no chance to like grow into something else. I had to carry it around with me. And thankfully I've like figured out a way to work with it, but like I just want, and now I guess I'm not quite answering your question. What do you do when someone's in a psychotic state? I would just like to make a push for like us having a like really reframing the way that we think about what psychotic process is, Yeah, if someone's like gonna hurt themselves or hurt someone else, like sure, put them somewhere where they're not gonna hurt themselves and even put them on some drugs so they can get some sleep. But then understand that there's like something there important to work with.
Mhm.
Like our modern mental health system is so lacking in curiosity. It's so manager driven. It's so firefighter driven. It's so like we need to like do something about this right now and make sure this doesn't go any further. And that a lot of people suffer because of that. And that's a what I'm saying to you is like a systemic, it's a it's a it's a systemic way of thinking about things. And I just think we need more. I just think we need more like basic understandings about like what it means to be a human. You know?
Lots of people resonating with what you're saying here. I'm seeing lots of comments in the
Mhm.
chat. Uh, yeah, you're right. I found it really interesting the way you were comparing the system to different parts like firefighters and managers. That's a very interesting way of looking at it. I also think what you said about the fear of maybe someone's presentation being unusual or different from our reality. But then, as Skylar has written in her question, my training said it's a big no-no in working with schizophrenia. So the fear that our training, if you are a mental health professional, or trained in some way, that we're told not to work in a depth or relational way with people experiencing what is termed psychosis.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's complete fucking horseshit. I think it's just like I'm
Say
just like
how
I
you
think it I just
feel.
like think yeah I just think like what so yeah because I remember that from when I worked at On Track it was this whole thing about like oh you don't we're going to do cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis because we don't want people to go inside because if they go inside what they're going to find in there we're not going to be able to get them out and it's like come on, man. Like, can we do better than that for our young people? Can we do like what like
Right.
it's just there's something okay, that like those slides that I showed or like earlier on in the presentation that were the like okay, Virginia Satir and Gregory Bates and Murray Bowen and all that. If you're like going to school if you get a marriage and family therapy license, you study all those people. You like all of those people, that's part of your training. But they whitewashed out the whole part that all of them were working with people diagnosed with schizophrenia. They just took that out of the history. And it's so interesting because basically what they did was they bracketed out a whole class of people and said, no, this stuff doesn't apply to you. And talk about exiling, you know?
Mm,
What would it look like if we reintegrated that like that wisdom in a way and I don't think it's going to happen, at the first episode program that I worked at, I think it's going to happen on the ground. I think it's going to happen in a grassroots kind of way, and it's going to push things in a direction. And one of the things I like about internal family systems is that it's it's both working in the system, and so there are all these people who are practicing therapists who are trained in it all over the world, but they also like understand the importance of people who aren't therapists doing the practices. And so there's actually like an amazing Facebook group that if for those who have Facebook accounts, like there's like thousands of people that are talking about IFS who aren't therapists, and it can
Hmm.
get a little funny sometimes, but like that's kind of the nature of you know, doing things in the public. Anyway, that ability to do things both inside the system and outside the system is part of what attracts me to the internal family systems model. And I see, if I didn't say it explicitly, I'm going to say it right now. Like, I see what Dick Schwartz did. He took all of these systemic family therapy ideas from all these different people. He wrote the textbook and then he like used it to develop this model that can be used with individuals. And it's brilliant. It's like a very intelligent, it was a very intelligent thing to do. And I'm grateful that I get to, partake in it and practice it.
Did you want to say any more about the use of IFS by non-therapists and how you feel about that and how that could be implemented?
Well, let's just be really clear here. I spent years of my life doing peer support, like, and it was like just seat of our pants kind of peer support, getting groups of people together and having conversations about suicide and having conversations about like taking care of our friends you know, and then I went to social work school. And one of the striking things about social work school is that I got to see how they socialize clinicians. I got to participate in the socialization process. And one of the strangest things about it is when you're trained to be a clinician, you're trained to not talk about yourself. You're trying to not disclose. And then if you want to get even weirder, then they created this role in the mental health system called the peer specialist role, where your job is to disclose and to talk about yourself. But like everyone looks down on the peer specialist and they get paid less than everybody else, and because they're not clinicians. And so I had this, I was standing at this crossroads basically where I worked at the I was like working at the Center for Practice Innovations. I had my master's in social work, wasn't collecting my clinical hours. I was technically a trainer, and and I basically decided I'm going to start a private practice without getting my clinical license because I don't really like the way they talk about psychosis and like just like that person you just quoted, like, oh, if you're schizophrenic you can't be getting depth therapy. It's like I don't want any part of that. I don't want I want to work with these are the people that I want to work with, and I don't want anyone telling me that I can't do it or that I'm gonna get my license taken away because of the way that I'm practicing. So to answer your question about how do I think about people who like aren't therapists? What? Yeah, great. We should all be doing it. This is like I think these are just like really smart ideas and we should all be talking about them. And I do think that um I think I can do what I do. Oh, the hearts. Thank you. Sweet.
Lots of
Sweet.
hearts.
Sweet. I think I can do what I do because I've
Mm.
lived through some really intense shit. I can do what I do because I'm diagnosed myself with bipolar 1 with psychotic features and and so I I'm good at what I do. I'm good at sitting with people who are like in intense places because whatever. There's a bunch of shit I'm like not good at in the world, but I'm like, it turns out that I'm like pretty good at this. And I don't think you need a clinical license or even a master's in social work. I don't think you need any of that to be able to be good. I think, in fact, the the thing I do trainings now for first episode programs around the country, like for the peer specialist role.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's really occurred to me recently is how the young people that are coming into these first episode programs that are like these programs are trying to do the best they can with what they got to like help them, but really the way they need to be thinking about it is that those young people are are the next leaders. Like they're the ones who are going to be, if they're taken care of and they learn how to take care of themselves, they're going to be so good at working with other people. And that's what, like, the peer specialist role in the mental health system is problematic. And like, I could list, 12 different things about why it's problematic or whatever. But like, in an ideal system, we would have people taking care of each other and having it be like we would actually build support networks, and there's no, like, and the reasons why we don't do that have to do with, uh, you know, societal parts, protectors and managers and firefighters, and like, and liability, the fear of, oh, someone's gonna kill themselves on my watch, and then I'm gonna be like liable for it, or, like, oh, it just makes me so mad. Like, I could feel the
All of that.
anger rising up in me as I was just thinking about it.
All of that sprinkled a little bit of capitalism. All right, I'm going to ask a couple more questions. We have some really good ones in the chat. I'm going to go to Mira's question right now. Considering people in colonized diasporas in the global north are disproportionately diagnosed with psychotic disorders, how do practitioners of IFS take into account the systems of the state which present legitimate threats and can inform internal voices and external realities? And in parenthesis, especially considering one of the tools of colonialism is the disruption of family units, therefore shaping many family dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, that, like how do you take it into consideration? Well, if you're working in the public mental health system, you you have to name it all. I mean, that was one of the, like, there's another one of these striking things for me. Like, when I was working at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, I just remember, like, at some point I realized, it was pretty early on. I was having a conversation, so there's like the lingo that people used. I realized that when people were talking about serious mental illness, they were, it was basically like, you know, uh, racism and gender violence and colonialism and all that. It was like a way of not talking about all these other things. We can talk about, oh, this person has serious mental illness, and then we're not talking about all the reasons why they're seriously mentally ill. It's exactly like what I was saying earlier in the presentation when we were talking about, like, Gregory Bateson and the identified patient. It's like, oh, this is the one who's sick right here. But like, how did they get sick? So, uh, I heard your question, person who asked it, and I feel like part of what you're asking is like, what do we do about this? You know, and I think you said, like, what do IFS practitioners, what do we do about this? I feel like what we do about it is we organize. As we organize. I mean, I don't know if people on this call are familiar with the Institute for the Development of Human Arts, but that's like the training institute that my friends and I started, that grew out of the Icarus project. And I feel like, oh, a heart coming up. Yay. I mean, I feel like, yeah, this kind of work, this kind of like intense depth work needs to come with organizing. I mean, God, we have a hard road ahead of us. Like, given the way things are going, like, this is being recorded a couple weeks before the election. It's like, we have a lot of work to do. But like, the way that I've learned to make it work for myself, and like, try to figure out how to, like, raise children in this world, and like, be a person, is that I understand there's some things, there's like, I have a self, you know, the self in me. It's actually, you were talking about colonialism, and like, you could have your critiques of it, but whatever. There's a Sanskrit word that the modern yoga people really love, namaste. It's a deep word, actually. If you look at it, it's a namaste. It means like, the divine in me bows to the divine in you. It's this understanding that we have divinity in us, and that everybody has divinity, and you learn to see it in everyone, and even the people who were your enemies, even the people who were like destroying our world, they have it in them as well. And you act accordingly. I guess that's what I'd say.
Thank you. I'll go so far as to say if we're going to be good clinicians or healers or peers, and we have to, it's our responsibility to organize and do something socially and systemically. I don't think we can practice ethically without taking that additional step. But I won't get on my soapbox. I like a good soapbox. Okay, I really wanted to ask this question from Ron Unger because I thought it was a really good one, very practical. So what can you say about how to work with people who report that experiences in their mind are not due to the activity of parts, but instead of something else, like a demon or the CIA talking to them through a brain implant?
No, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. I mean, I think the thing that, I mean, there's actually that, Ron, opens up a whole can of worms that we don't have time to really delve into. But I think that, like, the thing to do is to like stay really curious, you know? I think part of my training, you know, in how do I say it? Like, okay, so when we started the Icarus project, one of the things that we said that I think made it be a successful project was we said, um, if you take psychiatric drugs or you think that psychiatric drugs are poison, you're welcome to be here. And if you use diagnostic categories to define yourself, like schizophrenia and bipolar, or you reject all those categories, you're welcome to be here. And the ability, I think what happens, I would take an educated guess and say there's a lot of people in clinical roles who are actually very fixed in their thinking. And so when someone comes in and starts talking about demons or CIA agents or whatever, they're like that they come out, it's there's an immediate polarization. What I do, I mean, I think it's like a the IFS thing is kind of like a dance, but you're dancing with a bunch of different parts, you know? You want to be like someone comes to you and they start saying some stuff like that. You listen from yourself, and then you also have other parts um that are there that can, you know, step in if they need to. Kind of like at the beginning of the presentation, I was like, where this is going to be a presentation about psychosis, and there's a number of biological factors that might make someone cause someone to, you know, experience symptoms of psychosis. That like that's like a I think that's really important. Like the psychiatrist is the person who should be doing that. They should be in charge of that. They shouldn't be in charge of like, you know, talking to the person who is telling them about the CIA agents. That should be us. You know, like how's that?
Yeah. Okay, we're almost at time, but I just wanted to ask this one last question. And that was from Leander. And there's a very quick one after that. But my question is how to use IFS without it falling into the trap of individualism, where we end up internalizing the sense that it is all on us to fix ourselves, or that we are responsible for everything, all the parts are inside my head. Because I believe that belief is why often someone in altered states projects their entire world outward because of the insanity they're trying to deal with internally. So what is the necessity for community being brought into this lens?
Oh my God, that's such a great question. God, we could just like do a whole other webinar, huh? I mean, like
Yes, I know, with
I
a few minutes.
no, I
Feel
mean,
free to
I think
expand.
I think that's the beauty. I hope it came across in what I was presenting that I'm talking. This is internal work. This is deep internal work, but there's no way this work is that projection into the outside world. The outside world is projecting into you, whatever. Like it's there's a deeply um yeah, I just don't see it like that. And I don't, and I think that like I can imagine some scenarios where it could get interpreted like that if people aren't practicing the model. You have to be connected. I want to answer this question that Gabrielle says many clinicians will be concerned about psychosis damaging the brain, but don't consider the neuroleptics effect on the person's system. Oh, I guess I want to just say Right, exactly. I think that like they told me when I was a teenager, they told my mom that there's this thing, the kindling effect, that the more psychotic I got, the more psychotic I would get. I think that like putting people on a whole bunch of neuroleptic drugs, what they can do is it just suppresses it. It just puts it, you know, it puts it in a
Mhm.
or in your brain. I just think these things are like way more interesting. And we've just had way too much of an influence on, the pharmaceutical industry has had like a disproportionate amount of influence on how we think about the issue of psychosis.
Well, we certainly agree with you that here. So I guess we're wrapping up now. We did have one last question about what are next steps for training if people want to use parts work of IFS with folks they're working with. What resources would you recommend?
Oh man, let's see.
Here comes a bookshelf.
I like if you're into if it this is a great book. This textbook is like, that's a great book if you're like, clinically minded and you want to be uh, like delving into like the complexities of it. The introduction to IFS, both of these are by Dick Schwartz. They're both really good. And the IFS Institute has all kinds of trainings. IFS is like a very popular modality right now. I mean, that's kind of part of the excitement of this. This is like like that's the me putting Michael J. Fox in the DeLorean like in Back to the Future. I'm just like this is it's a powerful moment that people are like using this model that's actually very radical. And I think a lot of people don't realize how radical it is. So you can also just like reach out to me. I'm easy to find. I'm kind of busy, but I'm here, happy to happy to be in touch.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for a really amazing session. Thank you everyone for the questions and the engagement too. There was a really good conversation at the end we got to have and share together. If you have enjoyed today's webinar, I invite you to join us for our conference that's happening in just 2 weeks. In fact, the proceeds from this webinar are helping to support the attendance of previous Icarus project members to come and present. So thank you for contributing to that. And you can join us either in person in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or you can join us online. Sasha's going to be speaking. There's loads of other great speakers. Check out ISPS-US/conference to see the whole program. And I see some people are already coming, so that's good. I'm going too. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you again for coming. Thank you, Sasha. I will hopefully see many of you all in just a couple of weeks at that conference. I hope we get to see each other soon. All right, bye everyone.